Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Finish Line, Navigating the Journey Beyond Residency. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Sherman, pediatrician and physician coach. And I'm thrilled today to have as my guest Dr. Gail Gazelle. And Dr. Gazelle, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Joe.
Great. So Dr. Gazelle is a friend of mine, actually a colleague. We're both physician coaches and we work together. So we're very familiar with each other, and she is a very wise and experienced person that I've learned a lot from. So I'm really thrilled to have her as my guest. Dr. Gazelle is a former hospice physician, part-time Harvard Medical School assistant professor. She's a master certified coach for physicians and mindfulness meditation teacher. It's quite a few occupations that she holds, a lot of hats. Over the past decade, she's coached over 700 physicians and physician leaders, and I should also add, mentored many, many physician coaches. So she is a master mentor physician coach, I should say, too. She's author of several books and publications, among which are the most latest in the 2023 Mindful MD, 6 Ways Mindfulness Restores Your Autonomy and Cures Healthcare Burnout. In addition to that, the 2020 book, Everyday Resilience, a practical guide to build inner strength and weather life's challenges. So there are many other things I can say about Dr. Gazelle, but I would say that it would take up more of our time, and I want to hear more about her wisdom. So thanks so much for joining us, Gail. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, delighted, Joe.
Great, great. So let's start out by just telling us about what you do now, and then we can kind of go back and talk a bit about how you got there.
Okay. Well, I mainly work as a master certified coach for colleagues around the globe. And as you know, I have a team of coaches. and because the need is so great, because there's so much unrest in our profession. And I and my team coach physicians on how to thrive in this complex, some would say broken healthcare system that we find ourselves in, not just in the US, but in many countries across the globe. So I spend my time enjoyably coaching fellow docs, because what we'll talk about, I think, today is that there's so many things that we don't get in our training. We get wonderful things. We learn about every possible disease in our specialty and beyond. We learn about the pathophysiology, the pharmacology, everything. But I think it's fair to say that we also learn some things that actually derail us in our careers and certainly fuel burnout and dissatisfaction. So a lot of my work is, you could almost say, remedial in helping clinicians develop some of the skills and shed some of the beliefs that are actually holding them back. So
Wow.
that's how I spend my days, as well as writing and giving a lot of keynotes about burnout.
Yeah. And I know from experience that you have been doing this for quite some time now. How many years have you been coaching physicians?
I became a coach in 2011, and
Okay.
I actually had gotten coaching myself. I was struggling with burnout. You know, I was raising a child on my own. I had a busy academic and clinical career, and I felt like I was never good enough at anything. When I was home with my son, I felt guilty that I wasn't doing more for patients and I wasn't writing more papers. When I was, at work, I felt really guilty that I wasn't there for my son. Constantly felt like I had to prove myself. Had a lot of very limiting beliefs about myself. So I stumbled into coaching and found it just so completely career and life changing that I decided to become a coach. It really at a time when nobody in the profession knew what coaching was, very different than it is now, where it's almost like now you're only cool if you have a coach. Um, so that's a little bit of my own journey, is really sharing what I found so incredibly beyond helpful. Really, I'd had therapy for complicated life issues, and that was fantastic. But coaching really felt to me like boulders moving, things that I thought I would go to my grave with began to
Mm,
shift. And that's when I decided to transition to become a physician coach myself.
wow. So I can just, you say about being a physician coach and having gone to therapy and what your life situation was at that point. And I'm thinking about our listeners right now who are predominantly early career physicians. These are folks that are just getting out of training. And I know that you and I have both talked about that finish line. If I can just get to that finish line, that
Mm,
spot, all will be well. The delayed gratification, the all of this kind of put your head down and just, grind it out till you get to that place that will be, I don't know what it will be, nirvana, everything will be perfect. I don't know. Whatever it is that we tell ourselves to get through some really challenging times. So, a question I have is, you mentioned I'd already been to therapy and now I had a physician coach, and we physicians are notorious about not seeking help, not reaching out, being frightened to death about trying to get therapy, help for mental
mm,
distress, whatever you want to say. And yet you talked about it fairly casually. And I wonder if there are some listeners out there that are kind of like going, therapy, no, what coaching? Am I in trouble? Can you
mm.
can you give us some perspective on that?
We certainly learn that somehow we need to be invulnerable. We're taking care of vulnerable human beings all day long, and yet somehow we're not supposed to be a part of that group. We're trained, and this was true when you and I trained, but unfortunately it's still true, that we are the all knowing paragon, the captain of the team, the one who always has the right answer. And, you can kind of think about in the early days of the COVID pandemic when there were no answers before we developed vaccines and treatments. And I coached so many physicians who felt like they were some kind of failure because they didn't have an answer. And so these are some of the things that we learn in our training, along with, if you're not perfect, you're a failure. We learn to put everybody else's needs ahead of ours. We learn to be very critical of ourselves. We get trapped in comparisons. And these are things that can really make it difficult for us to thrive. So we get a lot of calls from distressed residents, fellows, even medical students who are already struggling and not sure how they're going to make it. And I think the good news in 2024 and going forward is there's much greater acknowledgement that we can't go it alone. Okay, that we can ask for help, that we can admit, that we're human beings, and as human beings, we have challenges. And to acknowledge that and not feel that sense of shame. What's wrong with
Mm,
me? Everybody
yeah.
else can do this. Everybody else can, sort of man up, so to speak. What's wrong with me? So I want your listeners to really understand that there's nothing wrong with them. It's a complicated journey getting through medical training, getting through residency. It's really complicated. And sadly, it doesn't exactly let up when you become an attending. So, the ability to ask for help and to admit vulnerability earlier on, I think, is something that we need to get more facile with because that idea that we have to go it alone really can contribute to a lot of distress as we move forward in our careers.
Mm, yeah. You referenced kind of had when we were going through our training back in the day and what it was like and coming out, and what, say, an emerging physician just coming out of training, whether it's residency or fellowship or whatever it might be, in today's healthcare environment, and how different it is, and how society has changed so dramatically, and what is being asked of a physician
Mhm.
today compared to, I dare say, 40 years ago when I graduated from medical school. But what it used to be, even say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 10
Mm,
years ago. And can you say anything about kind of how you have seen, both through your own practice as a physician as well as a coach, how you have seen the challenges and struggles that emerging early career physicians are facing now, how that has changed over the years.
I think it's fair to say that the demands have increased dramatically. And what falls to the lot of the physician is really massive. All of the below grade tasks that we know about, whether you're in training or you're in attending, all the things that you have to get done, haggling with insurance companies, to get the MRI for the patient in need, the ever full inbox, charting, etc., managing staff that you have no ability to hire and fire. And while the hours may be more contained and there may be more of an expectation that this is going to be a job as opposed to a calling, I think it's fair to say it's not an easy time to be in healthcare. There's tremendous under resourcing in healthcare. All the competition, in large cities and small cities across our fair land lead to a lot of leanness, and understaffing, which make it even more difficult for the physician where it all falls. The rubber meets the road. You're the one responsible for the well being of patients. So it's very challenging. And what that really shines a light on is all the more reason to control the aspects of the situation that we can control and loosen the need to control the ones that we can't, because we learn in our training that we control everything. And that's a fallacy. It's a fallacy even about the human body. There are so many things that we as physicians can't control, but we learn that somehow we should be able to. And I see that in burnout in a lot of the physicians and physician leaders that I coach, because when we try to control the uncontrollable, well, we're setting ourselves up for not just failure, but tremendous disappointment and a sense of lack of efficacy. That's where mindfulness and coaching come in. And, I hope we can talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
the Mindful MD book. I share in the book my views on what happens in training and how it fuels burnout and really sets us up for many, many types of dissatisfaction. And similarly, how working with our own mind, our own patterns of reactivity, our own judgments, worries, preoccupations, etc., can really be a game changer in helping us manage the things that we can control, let go of the things we can't, and actually thrive in these careers that we've all worked so hard for.
Yeah, that I'm glad that you brought that up because I think in all that is written now and people talking about burnout and the burnout epidemic amongst physicians, it's often split into the camp of it's all an organizational structural problem or it's all a personal problem. You just have to kind of learn how to deal with whatever you're given. Um, I've always thought that trying to simplify it that way is a bit kind of uh, folly. It's much more
Well,
complex than that. But I'm
it,
curious now, as you mentioned about your book and Mindful MD, and that's your latest book. What would you say about to young physicians that are just emerging about how to kind of establish those habits that are really important and what you refer to in your book?
well, there's a lot. And it really has to do with working with the human mind so that we are the master of our mind rather than the captive. So, what do I mean by that? Well, the human mind is a very busy place. I probably don't have to tell your listeners that. We produce tens of thousands of thoughts a day, many of which are unbelievably helpful, of course, but many of them are not. Many of them are worries, ruminations, fears, preoccupations, judgments, rehashing, planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, predictions about a future that may never occur. And we can learn to discern which of our thoughts are helpful and attach to those thoughts and identify which of our thoughts are not helpful to us and learn how to let those pass by. That is such a key skill that I wish our training included. So many times medical educators reach out to me and they want to, have a 1 hour session that's going to teach everything about mindfulness. So, Gail, can you come and meditate with our medical students or residents? Meditation is great, but we're talking about something much deeper than that. We're talking about really becoming the observer of what our own minds are up to so that we can work most productively with our own mind. Again, I see that as a game changer. That's what's under our control in the setting of, as you talk about, so much in corporate medicine that we will never be able to control and frankly isn't about to change. So even if it's, 80% corporate America and problems in the healthcare system, well, when is that going to improve? Is it going to improve? Could it perhaps actually deteriorate further? So I'm a pragmatist, as a coach. This is really all about helping physicians and physicians to be function in ways that really contribute to their thriving, to their satisfaction. So mindfulness is not to me this kind of woo-woo thing out there, oh, just go meditate and everything will be great. It's really about how we use this critically important instrument that, the one that sits between our two human ears.
Yeah, I think there you bring up all of these great points, especially about our medical education uh, and I think there's this resentment amongst practicing physicians when they say that they're overwhelmed or they're burned out, and they get this response of, "Oh, it's all about mindfulness and meditation," and just kind of allow it to happen. And I know working with my coaching clients, it depends on where they are. And I do believe that some type of reflective practice and understanding how your mind works and this negativity bias and everything you refer to really makes a difference in trying to make those changes. But can you give us some practical ways that perhaps you outline in your book about what physicians can do?
Well, let's start with something you said a few minutes ago about telling yourself that you'll be happy once you become an attending.
Hmm.
So, I've been on Twitter and X for years. I've only really had a couple of tweets that have gone viral. But one of them is really about the following, which I discuss in the Mindful MD book. It's the storyline that we can have. I'll be happy when. I call that the IBHW malady. So, what do I mean by that? Well, you think to yourself, as a teenager, oh, I really want to become a doctor. So you think, well, wow, when I get into the right college, I'll be happy. Okay, you get into a decent or a good college, whatever, and you're in college and you're thinking, oh, I'll be so happy when I finally get into med school. You get into med school, it's not exactly a walk in the park, is it? It, brings up a lot of challenges, a lot of sacrifices. So then you start thinking, well, I'll be happy when I match into the right residency. Okay, you get into a residency. Hopefully, it's the one of your choice. But residency is really difficult, very long hours, low pay, a lot of delayed gratification. So then you start thinking, I'll be happy when I become an attending. And if you're in training right now and you talk to attendings or you just look around on rounds and wards, you know that people aren't exactly happy. People are struggling. But these mental stories that we can have, like the IBHW, leave us forestalling our happiness, forestalling what we can enjoy in the here and now, the only moments that we can actually be sure of. And they keep us from actually owning our own satisfaction right now. So that's just one example, Joe, of where the mind gets in our way. Because we
Mm,
all have these stories. We have stories about being an imposter. That's a fairly common one for trainees and for attendings, very esteemed attendings. A lot of us walk around, feeling like an imposter. And yet, that is also a mental story, a story that may have some kernel of truth, may not. And yet, we can let that story really erode our sense of well being, our sense of efficacy, our sense of really belonging here in these careers that, again, we've worked so hard for and we deserve to really feel good about. So, those are
yeah,
just a couple of examples that come to mind.
yeah. So You bring those examples, that whole idea of that finish line, just get there, or when I get there, when I get there. And so both with this kind of like I'll be happy when, as well as the imposter syndrome. So say you were coaching a someone who has just gotten out of residency or fellowship, and they find themselves in their first or second year of practice, whatever that might look like today. Most of the time it's an employed position. um, and all of a sudden they're kind of like, where's my next finish line? What's the next thing? I'm looking around the room, everybody else seems to have it all together and know what they're doing, and I don't. And what do I do now? Do I quit medicine?
Mm.
How do I make it for the next 30 years or 20, whatever I am?
Well, there's a lot of ingredients
Mm-hmm.
to running this marathon of a physician's career and life.
Mm.
Aren't there many ingredients? I think one of them, though, is we can be very focused as physicians on problems. We're the fix it people, right? That's our
Mm-hmm.
job. Somebody
Yeah.
comes with whatever ailment they have. Our job is diagnose it and fix it, treat it somehow, make it better. That's a great lens, but we can over apply that lens. We can start looking at everything as a problem, at ourselves, at our relationships, our kids, if that's relevant, um, at really at our careers and our very existence. And we can find that the human mind, because of the negativity bias, keeps us focused on what isn't going well, what we're not doing well, what we're not doing enough of, what we think other people are doing well. So, kind of this delta between where we are and where we perceive others to be. And that's something that we have to be aware of. That's
Mm-hmm.
mindful awareness.
Hmm.
And we have to be able to switch our focus to what's going well. So many residents call me, Gail, nothing's going well. Attendings as well. Nothing's going well. I'm not achieving anything. I'm not as good as others. And after listening and empathizing, I'll often challenge them. So, Dr. So and so, if you do an inventory of the patients that you saw, over the past week, tell me about some bright spots. Tell me about some things that went well. Often there's a big pause, and then the physician can jump in with again the litany of things that didn't go well. Because there are things that don't go well. This is not, putting on a happy face and acting like it's all fantastic. But after a few moments, that physician will almost always tell me about some positive patient interactions where they helped that patient in large or small way and they made a difference in that vulnerable human being's life. And when they do that, their face softens. This little smile can appear and they're taking in some of the good that is truly there, not fake. This isn't Pollyanna put on a smiley face. This is the reality of a balance between looking at what isn't going well and looking at what is. A very practical aspect of that is when we get into bed at night, and many of us do an inventory of, oh, I wish I'd done this, and why didn't I do that? And there's so much left, my to do list for tomorrow. We can actually push ourselves to do an inventory of what we did well. What did we accomplish, small and large? It's a way of writing the negativity bias that, affects all of our brains. And it's not an idle exercise because if you're so focused on everything that isn't going well, real or perceived, it's hard to really sustain yourself. It's sometimes it seems to me like you're like crossing the desert without a drop of water. And those drops of water are actually there for us in the practice of medicine, no matter what is going wrong.
Mm.
And Joe, one of my big lines is, physicians don't have to hand over their happiness to broken healthcare systems. They can if they choose to, but they don't have to. And to me, that's kind of like the puzzle piece that's often missing about where do we blame the system or somehow do we expect, individual physicians somehow to do more? Individual physicians have so many skills, so much resilience. We need to apply that resilience and realize the choice point that we don't have to hand it over. That's the autonomy that we can resume. And for me, mindfulness helps us restore that autonomy.
So that's what if you get to that point, and I know for me in my career, I I was out of training as soon as I possibly could be.
Mm,
I mean, it wasn't purposeful trying to take the shortest residency, but I went into pediatrics knowing that I loved kids and I wanted to actually get out there and start working. So I didn't do a fellowship, subspecialty, all these other things, but I did find myself right away in the first year, my first job, looking around and saying to myself, well, I don't belong here. This is not me. This is
mm,
not where I belong. And it wasn't quite like that. It wasn't that quick and linear because first I had all these somatic symptoms, backaches,
mm,
headaches, and all of these things that I thought my body was rebelling for some reason. So, not going into detail about me, but how does someone who has now let's say, enlisted some of these practices of mindfulness, of looking at those wins or those joyful moments, those positive experiences, and yet they still find themselves with that dread, that morning dread of as you get up or as you get in the car or in the parking lot, hesitating to walk into the office. How do we know that we're in the wrong place? How do we know that it's time to make a change?
mm. Well, that's a big question, and it's not a one size fits all. As you mentioned, I mentor a lot of physician coaches, and I'm seeing this trend of physician coaches, well, I'll get you out of medicine. I don't really see that as the answer. People have invested a lot of time, resources, etc., in this career, and they chose this career for a reason. And I'm not here to decide whether my clients stay or go, become librarians, or whatever they do. But I am here to help them develop more clarity. And for the trainee who is already experiencing that kind of dread that many attendings feel, I think is a really important starting place is compassion for oneself. Compassion because your career is really hard. The demands are all too real and they're enormous, and in many cases, they're growing. And you don't necessarily get the resources, the staffing resources, the time, etc. Good computer systems, AI for charting. And it's really hard. So we want to start with a metaphoric, hand over the heart kindness to ourselves for when we're going through something hard, because you're here as a clinician, you're taking care of patients all day. And when you're bringing all of that kindness and compassion to others, but excluding yourself, you're basically saying that other people deserve it and you don't. And that further accelerates the sense of isolation that I think many clinicians feel because the demands are so great and you're siloed, and you're on the computer all day that you lose that connection with colleagues. You lose that sense of community that you may have had in training. So I think self compassion, people might think of it, oh, that's fluff. I don't need it. The truth is that there's a rich data now, so much literature about the importance of self compassion in so many life arenas, including job satisfaction.
Mm.
So I talk about that in the book. That's what I see as the fourth way that mindfulness restores autonomy and cures healthcare burnout. And I'll just say, too, that your listeners can download a free chapter at my website, gailgazelle.com/mindfulmd.
Great. Yeah. And I know that on your website, you've got abundant resources and some not only access to coaching programs that are multifaceted, not only with individual one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and online classes and workshops. It's just an abundance of resources, both free as well as ones that people can invest in their careers, in their lives. So I encourage listeners to take a look at that website and take advantage of those, of all of those resources. I want to get back to your personal story and when you got to the point where after enlisting help of, you said, I know that you were going through your own personal challenges as a single mom and trying to raise this child, and also all of the pressures as a physician, a hospice physician, palliative care. And so you did get to a point where you said, I think I want to make a shift. I'm going to make a shift, and I'm going to shift into, at that point in time, something that was not as common as it is today, physician coaching. What was it in your life that really convinced you at that point it's time to make that shift?
Well, it's often complicated and multifactorial. And again, I'd seen the incredible help that I got in coaching. And particularly because it wasn't something that was part of our profession at the time, I really felt this urge to bring it to physicians and to be kind of what turned out to be a pioneer in this career. Um, it's a big deal to pivot careers. And there's a lot of groups now, a lot on Facebook about side gigs, real estate, doing this in your spare time, opening a winery, whatever. I think those are options for physicians to diversify.
Mm-hmm.
This is a hard
Mm-hmm.
job. So maybe to have something that's a little bit of a lighter lift on the side so that you don't have to bear the economic consequences. It's so tragic that pediatricians, family docs, geriatricians, make so much less than proceduralists. And so it's hard for trainees to follow their heart, to follow their passion, what it is that they really want to do because of the economic complications of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's each person's unique path, but to know that there are options and there are tools that you can develop that can help kind of burnout proof you as you move forward in your career. So I think it's kind of a both and.
Hmm. Okay. So you found at that point, after enlisting all of that support and really working to see where it is in medicine, where do I see myself continuing and what's going on? And it was through that experience with your own coach that you realized this is an opportunity. This is something else in my life that at this particular point in time I feel is calling me.
Yes, and life throws us a lot of curveballs. You've met my son. He's
Yes.
actually kind of my business partner in my
Yeah.
coaching practice. He's 27. He's the picture of health. But when he was a teenager, he developed Crohn's disease, and
Mm.
life became very medicalized. And I was working as a hospice and palliative care doc in, a somewhat stressful environment, and I was his only parent. And so I really had to change course. I couldn't go to work every day. Davi's needs were quite high. And again, the story has a good outcome. He's healthy, he's doing well, but I certainly didn't see that coming. So that also informed some of my career decisions because I needed to be more available for my child.
Yeah. And that's a hard choice to make. And I know for myself, who I am coaching as a physician coach makes a huge difference in those career decisions that they make.
Mm,
And one thing that I think the COVID pandemic showed us is that the burden on female physicians, on women physicians,
mm,
moms, uh, in our society is disproportionate, that it's much greater. And I know for my physician clients who have young kids and they're
mm,
trying to follow an academic medical career, and they have, a partner who's working full time, and here I am as this, older male physician, back in the Marcus Welby MASH, days, instead of the whatever it is days it is now, Grey's Anatomy or beyond that. Yeah, that it's different. It's
mm.
the challenges are very different. And
I think that the demands for women in medicine are really quite profound because there are also so many societal expectations of women. We learn to be people pleasers. We learn that we've got to always look great, no matter what's going on inside. We are not always so good at small talk, women with busy professional careers. And I can't tell you how many women I coach, who say, well, when the male physician says do X, everybody jumps and does X. When I say to do X, they roll their eyes. And so there's very real challenges for women, for people of color. I think these are very real. And the beauty of coaching is that it's completely individualized. It's meeting that person where they are with their unique challenges, with their unique makeup and their unique goals, and meeting them where they are and helping them really figure out whatever's getting in their way of living their best possible life, not later, but now.
yeah, I love that. I love that. And trying to see to really be look at your current reality and what is it that are your values and your priorities at this point in your life. Um, and I know working with you as a coach and I mean, my personal opinion is that all physicians could use a coach. I think
Mm,
that it's something that the pressures today that you face as a physician in this complex, ever-changing healthcare environment, you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone.
mhm.
So, if you were to have some let's say, some parting advice for that early career physician who's just getting started and kind of deer in the headlights? What did I get myself into? Yeah, what would you say?
Well, I would start by saying that you can do it. You have what it takes. You have a lot of strengths, whoever you are, strengths that have allowed you to get to this point in your life and career, and strengths that are not to be taken lightly. And you can figure out your way forward if you take some time to do so. And particularly if you take some time to get to know your own mind, your own hot buttons, your own patterns of reactivity, your own self-critical and or self-defeating thoughts. It's really worth getting to know them because, we can't treat until we diagnose. So we can't help ourselves until we get to know with mindful awareness how do we process things? Is our mind clear or is our mind kind of like muddy water with so much stuff and silt, floating around that we don't have clarity? So that's, I would say, my biggest parting advice. And, I'll just say that the Mindful MD book is really a practical one. There's stories of dozens of physicians that I've had the pleasure of coaching. And there are a lot of very pragmatic takeaways. It's not about sitting and meditating for hours you don't have. It's really about how do you maximize this machine that you operate all of your waking hours and some of your sleeping hours as well. So I hope it can be helpful to people.
Oh, Gail, I love talking to you because I think that both in your coaching, your talks, and in your book, you you take physicians and you say to us, we're human beings, and here's this Harvard physician in the all the ivory tower and all of the pomp and circumstance, and says, you're a human being first, and you happen to be a physician, and that life is more complex than just uh, you know going to this job every day and everything else just kind of falling away to the sideline. There's a lot more to it. So I appreciate your advice and your wisdom and mentorship. Um, I do have one last question, and then we'll ask about how people can, again, kind of find out more about getting in touch with you and your services. And that is, if you weren't a physician, if you were to go back and to say, boy, I think if I weren't a physician, I would to this day be, what do you think it would be?
Oh, I would have been a veterinarian, a
Oh,
large
okay.
animal vet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great working with animals. Obviously, large animal veterinary medicine is largely about production, but I would love to be out in the country breathing the fresh air and getting my boots wet. And, that's
Wow.
what I'd be doing.
Wow. Well, I hope you get opportunities to have some exposure to your veterinarian soul in there
Mm,
and give it some exposure. So I so much appreciate you taking the time
mm.
to talk to me and all of our listeners today. And how can folks find out more about your books, about your services, and about you?
So my website is gailgazelle.com, GAILGAZELLE.com. And as Joe mentioned, there are a lot of free resources on the site. We have a guide, Imposter No More, the free chapter of the Mindful MD book. We have a charting guide. So I encourage your listeners to avail themselves of those resources. And of course, you can find out more about coaching on the site as well.
Great. Well, Gail, thank you so much for taking the time again to join me and all of our listeners. And thanks for everyone else out there on joining us today on Beyond the Finish Line, navigating the journey after residency, and be kind to yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.